There we go. Okay, so I am Margaret Lovell, and I am the ward chair for 28C up in the foothills of Albuquerque for the Democratic Party. And this is our regularly scheduled bi-monthly ward meeting. And today we have two speakers joining us. We have Joseph Maestas and we have Devram Tiryaki. Have I pronounced your names right in every instance? Okay, nod. Did I get it right, Joe? Okay, good deal. Joe is a candidate for state auditor, and I'm going to give you a little bit of his biographical background, and then I'm going to ask him to talk with us about his candidacy, his campaign, his intentions, if we do in fact choose him as our nominee and then elect him. And Joe, the election's in November, am I right about that? But the primary, when is there a primary?
The primary is going to be in June, the first Tuesday in June of 2022.
All right. Thank you. All right. So let me give you a little background on Joe. He is currently the vice chair of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, and he has worked in the federal government at all levels for the last 30 years as a regulator, primarily in the areas of transportation and water resources. Additionally, he has served his communities as a municipal elected official for 14 years, including time as the mayor of Espanola and a Santa Fe city councilor. He has also been president of the New Mexico Municipal League, chairman of New Mexico Voices for Children Board, president of the Hispanic Elected Local Officials Board, and that's through the National League of Cities, and vice chair of the Conservation Voters of New Mexico. And Joe had told me that if elected as state auditor, he's going to modernize the New Mexico State Auditor's Office through the requirement of a consolidated and performance audit of state agencies and incentivizing strong financial management. So please welcome Joe. And Joe, if you want to give us, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, 15 or 20 minutes. And then if we have questions, we'd like to be able to do that at the end of your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Democrats from Ward 28C. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you, Margaret, for that introduction. One thing I also bring to the table is I also bring some private sector experience. I spent 4 years as a business development manager for a consulting engineering firm. So I bring a whole bunch of kind of public service and some private sector experience. I'm an engineer by trade. I have a bachelor's and master's degree, and I'm licensed to practice engineering in New Mexico and several other states, Arizona and Texas. As Margaret mentioned, I currently serve as vice chair of the Public Regulation Commission. You're looking at one of the last elected public regulation commissioners in our state's history. All 5 of us will be out of office at the end of calendar year 2022. Voters passed a constitutional amendment that's going to change the commission from elected to appointed. So we're an agency in transition. We're a state in transition. If you think about our transition to a clean energy economy, with the ultimate goal of having carbon-free energy by 2045 for the investor-owned utilities and 2050 for the rural electric co-ops. I will be the incoming chair effective on January 1 of 2022. And I want to let all of you know, I mean, we just ruled on some very high profile cases, the PNM Avangrid merger and the abandonment of PNM's financial interest in Four Corners Power Plant. Those 2 are still active cases. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll only speak in terms of what's a matter of record or what transpired. I really can't opine or prejudge or give you my opinion in terms of what might be the next steps in either of those cases. But some of the other things that we're working on at the PRC is my office is the lead in the rulemaking for community solar. Community solar is probably one of the most significant energy justice laws that we've passed, because it has a 30% carve out for low to moderate income communities on a per project basis. So The ultimate goal is to make solar energy affordable, accessible, and reliable to all New Mexicans, especially those that can't afford rooftop solar. We also just approved about $12 million in broadband projects. Primarily, I would say 2/3 to 3/4 will be in rural New Mexico. We've asked the legislature to increase the cap on the Universal Service Fund that actually has the broadband fund that we obligate monies for projects. So we're very busy at the Public Regulation Commission. It's an honor to be your vice chair. And what we're doing right now is we're trying to really rebuild this agency and hand it over to the appointees so that we can be very proud that, you know, we are handing over the agency in a much better position than it was when we found it. So we're very, very busy and proud of the work that we're doing. The commission is very collegial. We agree to disagree in a civil manner, but yet we're really turning our attention on productivity. So anyway, I wanted to give you a quick update, you know, on the PRC. In terms of my background, I mean, Margaret mentioned a lot of, you know, my experience, but I'm really a native New Mexican. Some people may not realize it, but I grew up on a small farm. I'm a farm boy. I was born in Santa Fe and raised in northern New Mexico in the Santa Cruz area on a small self-sustaining farm with farm animals. We also had a family business where all of us kids, we had to pitch in for everything, you know, to run the farm, run the family business. I'd come from a family of public school teachers and military veterans. My father was a teacher. Actually, he was my teacher in 7th grade, if you can imagine that. And so he instilled in us the importance of getting good grades and getting a good education. And so I think our whole family really lives by that credo. But so growing up in northern New Mexico on that farm really taught me the values of hard work, doing the right thing, and working hard. There was never a lack of tasks that had to be done. But I left home at 17 and I went off to college and got my bachelor's degree from UNM. And I began my work with the federal government. I traveled all over the country and worked at all levels of government. I even did some international work for the federal government in the Caribbean and Latin America. The feds also sent me to graduate school. So I have my master's degree from Arizona State. So the federal government, you know, really, I think, made me a much more well-rounded professional. I was able to experience things from many different places, and I think I grew as an individual. So after being gone for 16 years, I came back to the state and got involved in local politics. I served for 10 years in the city of Espanola, 6 as councilman, 4 as mayor. But, you know, every time you ask, you know, someone who is in elected office, what made you make that giant leap? Why did you put yourself out there? Well, I mean, I think people have very different motivations. They may start as community organizers. They may have a negative experience with their government to the point where they want to step in and try and do a better job as an elected official. And that was really my story. The government wasn't being very responsive to people, and I threw my hat in the ring and I won. And I've been fighting corrupt, entrenched interests in government to make government more accountable, more transparent, and to serve the people, you know, with humility and respect. And so that's been I think my philosophy throughout. When I moved back to Santa Fe after I stepped down as mayor of Espanola to restart my federal career. At that time, I still lacked 7 years of experience. So I went to Santa Fe and ran for city council and represented the Southeast side for 4 years. So I'm really proud of, you know, my public service experience. And, you know, we're talking about the Office of the State Auditor. This is a very, very important, constitutionally enabled office. It's independent. It's really the chief auditor of public finance throughout the state of New Mexico. It oversees almost 1,000 fiscal year audits, in addition to a number of special audits of agencies. It manages an anonymous toll-free fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. It also has an information service, a government accountability office, a GAO that's not like the federal GAO, but a GAO nevertheless, and it compiles all the information from all those 1,000 audits and tries to present to the people of New Mexico how their public money is being spent. But as you all know, the state of New Mexico is going to receive quite a windfall of federal funds. And it's very important that all the state agencies that are going to be managing these funds are prepared. And so as your state auditor, I'm going to make sure that the Office of the State Auditor is modernized, strengthened, and prepared for this great influx of federal funds. There's even some concern that the appropriate industries, whether it's the highway building industries or other construction industries, even have the capacity to help obligate all these federal funds, but only time will tell. I think the state's going to have to be very innovative in obligating that money, but making sure that it's spent where it needs to be spent. And so that's going to be my main charge as state auditor, is preparing our state to deal with this large influx of federal funding. As Margaret mentioned, most states conduct a consolidated state audit, but our state does not. Each state agency conducts its own audit. And I've heard stories of federal funds being managed by multiple agencies, but their own individual audits don't reconcile. And so that's a problem. And so I'm going to make sure that we do have a consolidated state audit. I'm going to make sure that that we use very limited resources in the best way possible. And that means being proactive, establishing a compliance plan to really prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. I mean, it's easy to say gotcha if you catch someone, but by then the damage has been done. And so I'm gonna come up with a compliance strategy similar to strategies that I use when I work for the federal government. You know, from an inspection in depth that's much more infrequent to more frequent desk audits, follow-ups on any alarming findings where there's a lack of internal controls. So there's many ways that the state auditor can identify these red flags and take action to eliminate or minimize fraud, waste, and abuse. The other thing I'd like to see done is I'd like to change the GAO, the General Accountability Office. I'm not sure of the utility of the information that it puts together. I'd rather have it function more like an inspector general, or the GAO like the federal GAO, which has investigatory authorities. The state auditor only has about 35 employees, and they conduct all these audits by extension, and that is through all these pre-certified independent public auditors. There's about 70. And so that office has got to work smarter and better. And without going into too many details, and I'm happy to answer questions about, you know, my plan for that office in more specific detail, but I think this is going to be a seminal moment for our state. How we already saw the battle over who has the authority to obligate federal funds, and now it's going to fall on many different agencies, and we need to make sure that we're prepared. And as your next state auditor, I'm going to do that. But look, the auditor's primary job is to be independent and to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And that's not going to change, and it shouldn't change, quite frankly. But there are agencies out there. Some have their own watchdogs in the form of an inspector general. Others do not. Most local governments and counties do not have an internal auditor or an office of inspector general. City of Albuquerque, it's a home rule city. City of Albuquerque has an inspector general. That office pays for itself within a matter of months. And so I'm going to really encourage more internal auditors, internal checks and balances for state agencies, particularly the massive ones like APS, Albuquerque Public Service. I think we saw the breakdown in internal controls with respect to one particular program. And we need to make sure that these large agencies have adequate internal controls before there's rampant fraud, waste, and abuse. So this is a very important topic to me. And in all my years as an elected official, every time I took the oath of office, there is one solemn duty that goes along with that. And that is having a fiduciary responsibility to my constituents to safeguard the expenditure of taxpayer funds. And so I have experience in carrying that statutory, that fiduciary responsibility, not just as a local elected official, but as one of your public regulation commissioners. So I bring a lot of experience. It's been my name at the front page of every fiscal year audit of every government that I've represented, an agency I've represented. And so with that, Margaret, I think I've probably said enough. I'll stand for questions. And if you want to ask about PRC things, that's fine.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. So I'm curious about this, what might be a transition from the Government Accountability Office to an Inspector General. Did I understand correctly that that maybe you want to move in that direction? Did I get that right? And if so, could you explain how that might work?
Well, yeah, this is going to likely require legislation. And I would say if every state agency had a robust inspector general function, and if local governments did as well, I don't think there'd be a need to. But I do feel like there needs to be more resources to respond, especially if we have a situation where fraud, waste, and abuse could be quite extensive and exist far outside a particular agency, which is what we experienced recently. So yes, it's going to require, working with the state legislature. And obviously too, if there's any criminal wrongdoing, the state auditor by protocol has to turn over an audit that may point to potential criminal activity to the Attorney General. And so the next state auditor needs to be aware of that and cultivate a very effective working relationship with the next Attorney General.
Okay, interesting. And how about with the next treasurer? Is that an area of overlap as well?
Well, the state auditor, there is overlap. The state auditor is got to audit all those investment funds. And so it's quite a responsibility for that office. And I think lately we've heard of some very high profile embezzlement cases in guardianships and conservatorships. There is a new law that requires the state auditor to not only receive each annual report by conservators, but to review it and then make a determination whether or not the state auditor is going to audit that report. It's primarily financial in nature, but I think this is another emerging responsibility of the state auditor because there's been so many problems in misappropriation of funding in guardianships and conservatorships.
Thanks, Joe. Any other questions for Joe?
Joe, this is Bami. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could give us some idea of the budget for this particular office, and maybe you said 35 people staff the office. Are they in special divisions? What kinds of expertise these people have? Are they lawyers, CPAs? Some background on the office.
That's a good question. There's the audit division, which oversees those 1,000 or so fiscal year audits. There's a special audit division that does just that, special audits of state agencies. It also covers the intake from the anonymous toll-free fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. And then there's the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, that serves as an independent information service. So 35 employees, 3 major divisions. My understanding is there's about 5 appointees, and it's important that, being a former mayor, I knew that I had to get the best executive team possible. And I've never felt like I needed to surround myself with yes people or political hacks. I've never done that. As a PRC commissioner, I'm an engineer, and I knew that I needed to hire an attorney to complement, my skills, because what we do is it's a lot of accounting, a lot of legal work, and a lot of engineering work. And so that's what I intend to do as the next state auditor, is to identify a cadre of certified public accountants, folks with experience in IG and in inspector general work, and have them as my executive team instead of political hacks. So it's very, very important to have a competent executive team to help lead the office.
What's the budget for this office?
I I don't know at the moment. It's got, sometimes the budgets have to account for vacancy rates, but I don't know what the exact budget is for the state auditor's office.
Any other questions for Joe?
Just one small observation, if I could. You mentioned the receiverships and guardianships. And I'm reminded that Marcus Aurelius, when he was the emperor of Rome, had an emergency and caused the Senate there to pass 5 or 6 important bills to control the crime and abuse in guardianships and receiverships. So this is not a simple thing. It's not something new. And if you have some good ideas on what we can do to control this, it's just a cesspool, and I will welcome it.
Well, there is some encouraging developments. The state legislature passed a bill to create this interdisciplinary team that meets periodically to assess the legal framework and the rules surrounding conservatorships and guardianships. The state auditor is on that. There's members of the Supreme Court and others, the administrative office of the courts. So it's kind of it's a multi-agency effort focusing on continuous improvement in our statutory and regulatory framework on conservatorships and guardianships. And I like that, because as an engineer, total quality management, I think, is critical. And we just don't do that here in New Mexico. We pass laws and the legislature says, whoopee, they celebrate. They don't really think about the implementation. And there's never this circle back kind of institutionalized process to say, hey, you know what, this law needs to be tweaked. This law has some fatal flaws. It needs to be rewritten. Because I can go through many laws that we're implementing right now at the PRC that really require refinement, if not a complete retooling. And we just don't do that. We don't do that. And so I commend the legislature in setting up this interdisciplinary group to constantly evaluate and assess guardianships and conservatorships in New Mexico.
I like the idea of total quality management. And having worked at Sandia Labs for a really long time, I can tell you that there's some expertise out there if you're interested in tapping it. I'm sure
I am. Actually, I am. And I would love to really just institutionalize that, because, what I've seen is, state legislators, they don't go to the agencies that have the subject matter experts. They have their own personal subject matter experts that they rely on. It's a citizen legislature. And so oftentimes these laws, are passed with some flaws, some blind spots. And I just think that, the consultation that goes into lawmaking really needs to be much more robust and much more nonpartisan. And it needs to have appropriate subject matter experts helping.
That's a very nice segue to Devram, who's now going to talk with us about the legislative process. Joe,
Before I let you hand it over, I humbly and respectfully ask for your support and your vote as the Democratic nominee for state auditor. Please visit my website. I'll put it in the chat. And if you wish to assist in gathering petition signatures or making phone calls or knocking doors, let me know. You can sign up through my website or you can contact me, but I'll put contact information in the chat.
thanks, Joe. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. You're welcome. So again, Joe, thank you. I appreciate that. And Devram, are you ready to talk to us about this legislative development process? All
I
right.
definitely am, yeah.
There we go. All right, so let me introduce Devram to you. For those of you who don't know him, currently Devram is a student at UNM Law, New Mexico guy, right? I'll let you tell that back part of your story. Let me see what I can, let's see here. It says, worked as a field organizer for the Democratic Party of New Mexico, which is where you and I will have crossed paths initially, I think. Helping organize across various counties. Let's see, you were a legislative aide in the New Mexico State Senate, working the 2019 legislative session in Governor Lujan Grisham's first term of office. You worked in the Senate Public Affairs Committee as well as for Senator Jacob Candelaria. And let's see, you were engaged with the Energy Transition Act as well. Then you were the district coordinator with the Office of the Speaker of the House, working with the entire House Democratic Caucus in community organizing and support of their bills and the capital outlay projects. Let's see, you are, in August, you left the Speaker's office to go to law school full-time. Am I right about that?
That is correct, yeah.
So that's a very brief overview of Devram, and he is going to help us understand the legislative process from, I think the way I put it in my email was, if it's a dream or a scheme, how does it get through the process and become something that winds up on the governor's desk and a law? So thank you. Take over.
Of course. Well, thank you, Margaret, for that wonderful introduction, and hello, ward members. Thanks for the chance to speak to you all here. I won't recap too much of my background. I think Margaret did a really good overview there, but I'm a New Mexican guy through and through. I was born and raised in Albuquerque. I went to UNM and studied economics and political science for my undergrad. And in 2018, when I graduated, I started working as an organizer for the Democratic Party, which is where I met Donna and Margaret and some of the other folks here, Linda and Bomi as well, I know. And then, yeah, so I did that for a little bit of a cycle there. And then after the 2018 election, I decided I want to get a little bit of experience in the legislature and see how everything works on that end. So like Margaret said, I worked in the Senate for a year for Senator Jacob Candelaria, and then on the Public Affairs Committee before I made the switch to the Speaker's office, where I worked caucus-wide with all of the Democratic representatives. I was able to work, throughout the entire state in just about every county in the interim, and then I worked 3 normal sessions and 3 special legislative sessions. So this has definitely been my world for the last 3 years, and I still miss out getting to be part of this, redistricting session they just wrapped up and the one coming up here. So I think to jump right into the legislative process here, I probably will do a screen share just to kind of like navigate around the website, if that sounds cool. I think it can kind of help guide my talk here. I'm sure many of you are all wondering, the way I was after the campaign cycle, how do these big ideas get put in the paper and made into law, right? You hear your state representatives or your state senators campaigning on these giant ideas of, whether it's community solar or whether it's, paid sick and family leave or any of these big bills. How does that actually get put on the paper there? Well, there is the interim committee process here, which I'm sure many of you all are familiar with. The New Mexico State Legislature page has actually got a really nice interface of being able to see what's going on. So you can see that there's all these interim committees here that are doing work throughout the interim between sessions here. So generally for a bill to start off, it starts off as a big idea, either, in the minds of a legislator specifically. Sometimes it'll be an idea brought to them from like an advocacy group or a think tank, or even other legislators, like from other states, who say, we've worked on this, we see it could really work well in New Mexico. And it will generally start off as just kind of a big idea there. So the first bills are community meetings, with legislators leading the process. You generally will have community groups that are interested, industry people, folks even from the executive. We're all just kind of hashing out ideas. You just get everybody in a big room. You start taking notes on what are the big things we want to change. What are some of the big ideas we've seen work in other states there? And you start kind of getting this almost like a bullet list, document going of just here's the big ideas we want to see get done there. Once you kind of have got like a good general idea of like what you want to get done with a bill and what that looks like, there's this entity called Legislative Counsel Services. I'm not sure if you folks are aware of that, but they are a team of attorneys up in the legislature that work year round. They staff up during the legislative session, but during the interim, they are working in all these interim committees and will do bill drafting for legislators who want to get what they call discussion drafts going. So I can show you, if you go to contact us and you go to Legislative Counsel Service here, and hopefully you guys can see this okay. You have to bear with me, my computer's a little slow. But you can see right here that they have attorneys, drafters, researchers, and committee staff. So generally when a legislator is, say, working on a bill that has to do with like education policy change, let's say. Let's give my computer a minute here. You'll see that they have a list of all these folks who work in these different areas here, who are research assistants, staff attorneys, bill drafters, analysts. You can kind of see the respective committees that they work on, if it's health and human services or, there's courts and corrections here. So a lot of the times, once a legislator has been working with community groups and been working with, all those other stakeholders to get a bill that they want to see drafted, they will work with one of these council service folks to develop what they call a discussion draft. And that is basically all these ideas that they send to these bill drafters put into a formal looking bill document. It'll say an act relating to, whatever, and then it will just literally spell out how does that look in action? What does the legislative language look like? All that good kind of jazz there. And so that's, how the process starts. You kind of, like I said, get these ideas together. Once you're feeling pretty good, you'll start working with these drafters to do a discussion draft. Oftentimes, if it's a big bill, there'll be many iterations of this, so you'll go back and forth with the attorneys and with the bill drafters, get new discussion drafts, have another meeting with all the stakeholders, kind of go through those provisions that changed, see what people's thoughts are, and just kind of so forth there. Generally, too, also, if it's like kind of a bigger bill, sometimes there will be presentations in these interim committees to just kind of have, a chance for public comment, a chance for just an on-the-record discussion with committee members of what that process is going to look like. So once again, if you guys wanted to check that out, you can go to the committees up here. There's a list of all these interim committees that exist. There's definitely a general agreement that there's probably too many interim committees. A lot of them have overlap and whatnot, but they definitely do good work here. So, one of the more prominent ones, for example, is like Legislative Education Study, which does a lot of, education policy. So if you click on that, you can see what these guys are working on here. So you can go to like committee information. You can see the legislators that are a part of this committee. You can see the past meetings that they had. So they just wrapped one up just a few days ago, and you can even click on the agenda and see what was on the discussion here. So well, actually, I guess this one was postponed, so never mind on that one, but oops, I lost my let's see. So you can see from the one from like about a month ago or so, you can see that they had presentations on, addressing student learning needs, on a curriculum update, stuff like that. So that's, kind of what the interim process there looks like. Please, everybody, let me know if there's questions in between or if I'm going too fast or anything. I know it's a lot of information and I can tend to talk quickly, so let me know. So that's, like I said, that's kind of the interim process there. It's just a lot of discussions that go on between legislators and the bill drafters and the interim committees just to try to get a good discussion draft going there. In the lead up to a legislative session, once legislators are feeling really good about what this discussion draft looks like, you've got a lot of buy-in from The stakeholders and the community groups and the executive, they're a part of that process as well. Then the bill will be formally introduced into the legislature. And there is a pre-filing period. So one nice thing is if you can go to quick links, you see session dates here. This will give you an idea of kind of what that process looks like. So you'll see for this upcoming session, as early as January 3rd, legislation can actually be pre-filed. So that's where you have your discussion draft that you've been working on with council services. You actually will send it to the respective chamber, either the House or the Senate, to get it introduced formally, pre-filed formally. It'll get you a bill number. You can then kind of let the the advocacy groups know we've got our bill filed. It's House Bill 14, and then you kind of start the process of promoting what that looks like there. Bills can be introduced all the way up until the midpoint of the session, which would be February 2nd for this upcoming one there. So actually, it's a little bit before the midpoint, I should say, but it goes up until that point there. And there's a lot of strategy for sure in terms of introducing bills, what that looks like working through the legislature. Generally with a big bill, there'll be a lot of discussions that go on, not just with leadership of the chambers, but with, respective caucuses as a whole, of just kind of saying, what are our priorities for this legislative session? What big bills are folks working on? What do we want to look like? I'll give an example. When I worked in the speaker's office leading into this legislative session in January of this year, I worked with all 45 of our members to get a list of like, what are the big bills you're working on? What are your priority ones? Let's kind of rank them there. Let's sit down with leadership and talk about like what looks like viable for this session. What do you want to see get done? So there's a lot of work that gets done by the staff leading up to the session of like, what are our caucus-wide priorities? What can we get done? What can we move around here? Bills will sometimes even be introduced into both chambers as kind of a strategic level to see, what gets better traction. So if it's kind of a controversial one, you might have, the representative introduce it into the House representatives and a senator do it in the Senate just to kind of give it a better chance of working its way both kind of ways there. Then when it comes time to committee referrals there, the committee referral process is pretty much up to the discretion of the head of each chamber there. So that'd be the Speaker and the House Representatives and the Senate Pro Tem and the Senate there. And so, once a bill has been pre-filed and introduced, you guys can see it'll be read out on the floor of each chamber. We'll just say, House Bill 4, an act relating to so-and-so. And then either the Speaker or Pro Tem will refer that to a committee. Every bill gets between like 2 and 3 committee referrals there. And that usually is a pretty strategic process as well there too. In my experience, the leadership will work a lot of times with the chairs of the committees and the caucus wide as a whole to kind of understand like, what is this referral process going to look like? If you've got a bill that's going to do like community solar, here's some of the committees we're anticipating it going to. And any bill that has to do with like appropriating money will almost always go through the respective finance committees, just because that's just kind of the way it goes. If you're going to try to spend some of the taxpayers' money, you got to get the buy-in of the finance committees there. So you can actually see the list of what those committees are for the Senate on this other half here. So you've got all these interim committees that work in between sessions. During the legislative session itself, it's these ones here. So it's about like 15 or so for the House and 9 for the Senate. And at any given point, you can kind of see, okay, what is House Judiciary working on here? And obviously, since we're not in a legislative session here, it's not going to show anything, but you would have a list of legislation that's been scheduled and referred to that committee there. You can also see everybody who are members of that committee as well there too. I can even show you a little bit more in depth there. So I'm just going to pull up like a random piece of legislation from this past session. Just kind of show you guys like what that looks like. House Bill 14, since I've been talking about that. I don't know what bill this is, but let's see. So Grants Administration Act, you can kind of see here on a bill's page what happened with it. This bill got sent to the Senate Finance Committee there, and it looked like it never made it out of that committee at that point. You can even see the actions here though. This will tell you that the bill was introduced into the House. It was sent to these two committees at first. There's kind of crazy acronyms, but that's House State Elections and Indian Affairs Committee and House Appropriations and Finance Committee. And then you can see it works its way through these committees there. So each committee will hear a public hearing, where they'll get public comment from members of the public. They'll do, presentations from the legislators, including any expert witnesses that they might have to talk about what is the bill going to do, what are the benefits, and take questions from committee members. Once again, oftentimes it's very strategic. You know, in my experience, a lot of the big bills, much of these discussions will go on kind of behind closed doors and one-on-one with legislators, trying to kind of get to a good point where before you even go into a committee, you want to understand where all the members are at, what are the big sticking points, and be really, really prepared and ready to go here. So, but for a bill like this, you can see that it made it through these two House committees with a do pass recommendation with amendments here. Do pass is the way of the committee saying, look, we like the look of this bill, we want to see it going, let's chug it along. You can see that amendments can happen at any point in this process, either on the floor or in committee. So if you're in, for example, this bill was in House State Elections Indian Affairs Committee, and it looks like they had some amendments they wanted to make to this bill there. So generally how that would happen is you would work with the bill drafter that helped you do the discussion draft, and you would have like another formal written out amendment that would be brought down and formally introduced. And it would be said, you know, I've got amendment number 1 to House Bill 14 for this committee, and it will do this, this, and this. So it looks like this amendment on this specific bill was super technical, you know, you can just, it's just kind of cleaning up some of the language to make it all consistent, but sometimes it can be full, you know, whole scale changes to the bill itself there too. There's even a way for people to do what they call a committee substitute. We actually substitute the entire bill that's before this committee. If you've just got such massive changes that it doesn't make sense to do like a giant long amendment there, you can put in a committee substitute, which is, it's got to be roughly the same bill, but it's going to have huge scale changes there. So this is a great way to kind of see like how a bill has changed throughout the committee process there. You can see most of these ones. See, once again, they have the House Appropriations and Finance Committee did some of those changes as well, and that's reflected in there. And it looks like this one eventually got through Senate Public Affairs Committee, got to Senate Finance, and it looks like it was never scheduled for a hearing. And that's where this bill ended up dying, unfortunately, there. So that's definitely one of the biggest challenges in getting your bills through the legislature is that there's just a time crunch. You know, there's a hard deadline to every session. It's either always 30 days or 60 days there. And there's always just hundreds of pieces of legislation trying to work their way through that process in a very crunched amount of time there. You know, in terms of scheduling bills in a committee for hearings, that's really up to the discretion of the committee chairs. They have a huge amount of leeway in terms of when to schedule the bill, if to schedule the bill, what that's going to look like, how much public comment to allow, you know, all this good kind of stuff there. So there's certainly a lot of you know, shenanigans that can go on with that as well there too. I think we see in both chambers sometimes chairs can slow down the process there. And then anyway, once bills get out of the committee there, they'll go on to their respective floors. Well, they'll be debated there. So sometimes it depends if it's a very, you know, uncontroversial bill. It might just get read out. The sponsoring representative might just say House Bill 14 does this, this, and this. I encourage everybody to vote for it. And sometimes they'll just go right into a vote just to kind of get the things chugging along quickly. Other times there might be pretty extensive debate. So in the House of Representatives, there's a 3-hour time limit on debates there. So there is, you know, you very often will see filibusters, you know, from generally the Republican Party, just trying to slow down the process and take up a lot of time that could be used to hear these bills there. The Senate does not have that limit on the filibuster time, so that can actually go down even longer there. But eventually, these bills will get a final vote, which you can also find on this page that shows you the bill there. And so you can see for this one itself, this final bill got 49 yes votes, 14 no votes, 2 representatives were excused, they were just out of the building for whatever reason, and 5 were absent there. That's a great way you can kind of see for every single bill, what is your local representative voting on, where were they at, what's the partisan breakdown, all that good kind of stuff there. And so theoretically, if a bill is able to get through all the committees and both chambers with minimal, you know, amendments there, it will end up going up to the governor's office. Any amendments that are made in one chamber do need to be agreed on by the other chamber. So say you pass a bill out of the House in one form, it's looking good. It goes to the Senate Senate committees make some changes. It has to come back for what they call concurrence. So you'll see towards the end of the session there, they'll do a big concurrence session where the House will just say, do you want to concur with the changes that the Senate made? And if so, then the bill is passed in its final form and it goes up to the governor's office there. And then the governor has, I think it's 30 days after the end of the session to sign the bills into law. She can either veto the bill outright, she can sign it into law, or if she does no action in those 30 days, it's a pocket veto is what that's called, and it's sent out there. The governor does have some line item authority, veto authority. So for example, like the capital outlay bill, where legislators have a pot of money to do their own projects in their districts. The governor can line item veto certain projects there and just kind of cut off line by line. But for most bills, it's either a total veto or nothing at all there. And so you can see this bill didn't actually make it all the way out, but this is where you would see if there was a governor veto there. And generally the governor will also kind of give like a message too of like why they vetoed this bill, what they didn't like, all that good kind of stuff. Cool. So going back briefly just to the process itself through bills, you can also see this thing called amendments in context, which will also kind of give you like where these amendments were made in the bill and kind of highlight how that's changed over time too. So it's pretty technical, but you can kind of see, you know, what those changes look like. Another nice thing that every bill gets is something that's called a fiscal impact report here. So there's this thing called the Legislative Finance Committee, which is a team full of fiscal analysts down in the North Capitol here that for every single piece of legislation, they'll give you a fiscal impact report that tells you what this darn bill is going to do, where they're getting their information from, all that good kind of stuff. So you see for this one that Representative Dixon had sponsored here, I think this was to create like a administration to help counties apply for grants that are from the federal government. And so you can see that LFC reached out to all these different state agencies to get their feedback on what they think this bill is going to do. It'll give you little summaries of what the amendments in each committee did as well there too. And then it'll give you a synopsis of the original bill, as well as kind of significant issues that the Finance Committee cites. So if it conflicts with another bill or any kind of, you know, existing law, they'll give you that. They'll talk about any of the issues that respective state agencies may be pointing out. So they'll say, you know, DOT said that there's, you know, some issues that they noticed with this bill that they might want to see changed and whatnot. You see there's technical issues, all this good kind of stuff. So fiscal impact reports are a fantastic way to just get a quick rundown of what does the bill do, what have the changes been made, what are the state agencies saying in terms of what they see is going to be issues with that, and doing that moving forward here. And so I don't want to like talk too much. I know I throw a lot of information at you guys, but that's kind of a quick rundown of how bills will work their way throughout the entire process there. In terms of like citizen advocacy and chances for public comment there, you know, New Mexico is an extremely open state legislature, which I think is one of our pros here. Like Commissioner Maestas was saying, we are a citizen legislature, which does bring in a lot of issues in terms of legislators being able to, you know, give full attention to working on bills in the interim when they have to work, you know, their own day jobs to make income here. There's also obviously issues with our sessions being just so short, and there's just not a lot of time to be able to fix and tweak legislation that comes out of the session or is leading up to the session. You know, I know that's something that a lot of executive agencies will talk about when they try to come and implement a bill. They'll just say, we just could have used a little bit more time to tweak this or make those kind of efforts there. But those are just kind of some of the ways that you know, these bills move around. But in every committee, there's public comment opportunity, right? So in the state legislature, anybody can just go into the state legislature, walk right into a committee room and speak directly to the legislators on the bills themselves. You know, I know that there's some tightening up of who gets into the state capitol now in terms of like vaccine requirements. And, you know, last year we did a Zoom session so that everybody could get in to do Zoom public comment, kind of the way we are right now. But like, I will tell you anecdotally that public comment can make a huge, huge difference. I think on a lot of bills, I've seen legislators really swayed one way or another by folks coming up to speak to them one-on-one or in a committee process, give personal stories on how this bill is going to affect their lives, what they're hearing from the communities. I think that's actually one of the strongest parts about the New Mexico legislature is our ability to have that kind of public comment there. So generally, any kind of committee you'll click on, you'll get like the agenda. Like I said, it doesn't show us right now here, but during the session, you'll see the agenda of what's going on, and there'll be information on how to do public comment, if it's virtually or just what that looks like there. And then just I would also say that legislators respond very well to like one-on-one kind of talks as well there too. You know, there's always those legislators who just will get tons of just kind of like forum emails or just like lots of calls that go to their front desk and they'll have their assistant logging those things down. The legislators, which you actually reach out to them, you get the one-on-one time down in their office or call their cell phone or do anything like that. That goes a long, long way as well there too. And for legislators, most of them actually have their contact info posted online. So just to pick like a random one, Representative Alcone here, you can click on his page. And you can see his phone number there too. And generally you can reach out to either his email or his phone number. You know, I know at least on the House side, we really try to encourage our representatives and work with them to have everybody be super responsive to those, stay on top of talking to the constituents. You know, I think all of our reps really, really value a chance to be able to talk to their constituents about what that looks like. And this page is also really good to see, you know, what your representative, what committees they're on, what interim committees they're on, and bills that they've sponsored here as well there too. So for Representative Alcone, for example, you could see what he worked on in the last session. And boom, you can see all these kind of bills that he worked on there too, and see what happened with them. You can see that this one actually got passed all the way into law here. So this one got chaptered, signed by the governor there, that got through the entire process. You can see on actions, passed the House of Representatives unanimously, got sent to these 2 Senate committees, no amendments, just was a due pass. It got unanimous support in the Senate as well, and it was signed by the governor on April 6th and chaptered into law. And that one made it all the way through. So that's kind of a quick overview there. There's a lot of other information I could dive into and talk about, but I don't want to bombard folks with information. I know that's probably a lot to take in, kind of talking about it. So, Margaret, I wondered if I could leave some time for questions from folks, or
I think that's great. Devin, this is wonderful. This is a great education for me, and I imagine that I see some heads nodding. I have just a couple of questions to clear up.
Sure.
If a bill starts in the Senate and passes the Senate and then goes to the House and is amended, then it has to go back to the Senate. That's concurrence.
That's concurrence. Yeah.
And it can go from either house. In other words, a bill could start in either house, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So then my second question is, in the federal government, there are certain categories of legislation that have to begin in the Senate or have to begin in the House. Is that true in New Mexico, or can a funding bill start anywhere? Or
that's a good question. For the most part, they can start anywhere, but there are some exceptions. So like in the House, we'll always do something they call like the feed bill. And that's the bill just to fund the government, basically. That's the bill that will fund all of the, executive agencies that do their work. It will fund, just kind of all that like recurring funding that goes towards the government to be able to do their job. That generally will always start in the House of Representatives there and move its way throughout the process there. That's just kind of, I think, how traditionally it goes. I'm not sure if that's in the Constitution or not, but that is an example of one bill that will always start in the House. Like the capital outlay bill, for example, that's always a big one that comes through every year and is hugely popular. That usually will alternate which chamber it will start in. So something like that, there's just kind of like an agreement, 1 year the Senate will run it, 1 year the House will run it, and they'll kind of go back and forth there. But for the most part, legislation can start in either chamber though.
okay, and then one other question for me, and I hope others will have some as well for you. The fiscal impact report, the one that you showed us on the screen was for a bill which didn't get a vote.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point in the life of a bill, or maybe even before a bill, is there a fiscal impact report prepared?
So the moment a bill gets filed and introduced, that's when a fiscal impact report will be produced. It's almost unheard of for a bill to get heard in committee, like its first committee, and discussed without a fiscal impact report. Legislators do not like to do that. It's honestly, it shouldn't start off that way. So before a bill even gets to its first committee, there really will be a fiscal impact report created that will just give you a breakdown of what does this bill do, what are the fiscal implications, what is the input from the state agencies of what that looks like. And then as a bill moves through committees there, if there's any changes that have been made, a new fiscal impact report will be created that will reflect those amendments that were put in for each committee. So those are created right away. And like I said, every piece of legislation gets one of those from the Legislative Finance Committee.
Okay, thanks, Devin. We have other questions for Devin?
Devin, this is Bami.
Hey,
I
Bami.
was wondering, is information on a special session displayed pretty much in the same way as a general session? And then if you want to attend a committee hearing by video, where on the webpage do you go to do that?
So I can show you here a little bit. So one, yes, for special legislative sessions, everything will be the same in terms of the normal legislative sessions. You can go, let me share my screen again and kind of show what that looks like here. So at any given point, you can go to this What's Happening tab, which I think is actually really helpful. And that'll tell you what is going on in the legislative session. So if it's a normal session, all of these things will be filled up with what's going on. And same with a special legislative session. So that one just ended, but if this was a few days ago, this page would tell you like there's calendars for each committee, what's happening, what's going on there. Let me see if we can see the kind of like an archived look of what that is. Yeah, so you can see here at any given point, that's how you would kind of tell. You can see the House floor calendar, you can see the Senate floor calendar. These would tell you all the bills that have been introduced that are on the list. Well, that one doesn't quite tell us yet because that was the day one, but that's how you could kind of find out there. And then at any given point during a legislative session, if you want to go to any of these committee pages, this will tell you, let me see if I can find, let me go back to this one. So you can see, for example, here, this says click here to view the PDF calendars for instructions for submitting public comment. During a legislative session, any of those committee pages will have an agenda for each committee hearing, and that will tell you, yeah, see, it doesn't work right now because we're out of a legislative session. At any given point, you can click on one of these committee pages and it will give you an agenda that will have instructions on how to do public comment. So if the legislature is open to the public and allowing people in person, you just walk right in. You just walk right into the building, just go right into any of the committee rooms that are there. You just look for the agenda that tells you what time they'll be starting. You can just sit there in person and give your public comment when it's time for when the committee chair says so. For virtual ones, the agendas listed will give you information on how to do public comment. So for the House of Representatives, the way we did it was that every committee agenda would just have a Zoom link there. It'd be a public Zoom link for anybody to join on virtually. And then folks could do the little raise hand function. So you would just be in a Zoom call that was in there. The committee chair would say, okay, we want to hear public comment on House Bill 14. Everybody in the audience who wants to do that, please raise your hand. And then we would just kind of go down the line and just unmute people and just let them speak for however long the committee chair allowed. In the Senate, I know that the committee agendas asked for people to register beforehand. So those agendas would usually have like an email address to email and say, if you want to provide public comment in this next committee hearing, please email us. We'll get you on a list and we'll give you the Zoom link. But that's generally how you would find them. You would click on the committees that you want to speak to, go to whichever one. They would have a calendar right here that you would click on, or an agenda, and that's where it would tell you the information on how to do public comment. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded of an answer and helps.
Thanks, Deborah. Any other questions for Deborah?
If I could just make one observation that supports what Devin was saying about the importance of comments. I remember that the legislator said, even if it's something that I really feel is important, if I get no interest expressed by my constituents, I wonder why I'm bothering to do this work. So even if it's something that you think you agree with and your legislator agrees with, it's still worthwhile to make the comments.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, anecdotally, it makes a huge difference. I know so many legislators who have been swayed one way or another by having constituents come talk to them about what they think on the bill there. So definitely.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, Deborah, can you close out your screen for us?
Of course, yeah.
Thank
And I welcome feedback too. Tell me, folks, if that was like too much of a bombarding of information or if that was helpful. Like, there's just so much going on, but
incredibly helpful to me. So I have been shy about the idea of going up there to talk, to lobby in any sense, partly because I haven't understood the process. So this was a great education for me on the value of how to interact and or the importance of interacting and how to do so. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll tell one last story. I think it's going to be even easier here moving forward too. I know at least in the House of Representatives this last session, we work super hard to have, Zoom be a thing in every single committee, and that's going to be something moving forward, is my understanding. So even for this next legislative session, if it's open to the public, of course, it's very encouraged to go up there in person and speak to the legislators. But I think having Zoom be available lets people from across the state be able to come in there too, if you can't commute to the Capitol. And that's big as well there too. I remember last session, we had a bill, forget exactly what it did, but it was something with agriculture and with farmers. And we had folks calling in from like all over the state. We're on their farm. You could hear the animals in the background there. And they said, look, this is incredible. Like, I would never have the ability to drive to Santa Fe for an entire day and spend the whole time there. But like it's good to have the opportunity to just call into a committee and say, this is what my process is. So legislature's got a lot of, issues for sure in terms of the length of time that they meet and the citizen legislature. But I think in terms of being open to the public and accessible, it's a really, really cool thing. And everybody I hear who goes up there to advocate are pleasantly surprised by how easy it is to talk to legislators one-on-one and do that.
Good to know. Thank you. So I want to thank both Joe and Devin for taking their time to be with us. And I don't want us to break up before we hear from Bob. Bob, you were at the executive committee meeting, is that correct, for the county?
Yes, ma'am, I certainly was. And I forgot to mention it before we got started, but with Mr. Meis's comments about the petitioning process, it was brought up during the executive committee or the executive session that because of precautions, COVID precautions, it's going to be really difficult this year for people to get petitions signed. And there are some formalities and restrictions that they recommend that you be aware of and that we follow. Number one, every petition that is signed has to be a hard copy. You cannot send a virtual copy. You can't get all your neighbors to sign one for Joseph and then run it through your machine and send a copy into the state. That is not acceptable. You've got to have the actual hard copy with the signatures, with no extraneous marks on the paper, and the candidate's name and the position and those things. So what they're recommending is that that you get a hard copy, let's say a petition for Joseph for our ward, and you make a copy of that petition on paper for everybody that's going to gather signatures. And if that person that's gathering signatures only has himself and his next door neighbor on that paper, that's fine. He can make additional copies of that document before he goes out to getting signatures, and he can turn in 25 of them with 25 signatures, and that's fine. That's acceptable. That's expected. Just the old way of just getting signatures until the paper is full, don't worry about that this year. Just make sure you've got a clean hard copy on white paper and get the signatures on it and submit however many of those pages you have.
Great, thanks, Bob. I appreciate you letting us know that. Let me just say that the February meeting is probably going to be February 20th. I'll do a couple of newsletters between now and then, and we'll do it by Zoom. I think we were going to do it by Zoom regardless of whatever variant was coming down the pike, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to continue doing this for a while. My intention is to have myself and maybe one or two other folks from the State Platform and Resolutions Committee talk about that process. So not a legislative process, a party-specific process, but one that can influence legislation because the platform is approved by Democrats throughout New Mexico, and it is a tool on which a candidate can run and a tool by which we can hold elected officials accountable. So State Platform and Resolutions Committee, I think we'll probably talk about that in February. Again, Joe and Devram, thank you both very much. Are there any
Thank
other
you.
Are there any other comments from other folks here in this meeting? All right, in that case, I'm going to adjourn us, and you'll be hearing from me, and I will look forward to seeing you again in February. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too.